Hey everybody, and welcome to the live stream. Really glad to see you join. My name is Nadia. I'm a UK Global Talent Visa recipient and coach, which means that I got endorsed for this visa, and now I help other people get endorsed for this as well. So if you're watching this, I assume that you're interested in moving to the UK. Super glad to see you join. And if you're interested, of course, please subscribe and follow along in case you would like to get this visa in the future as well. So today is a really exciting day for me. So today I'm happy to introduce you to Vlad, who was one of my clients recently, who actually got endorsed for the visa also quite recently. And today we're going to talk to him, unpack his experience, talk about what documents he used, what his strategy was, like what his experience with getting the visa was. And if you are already planning to tune in because you see another guy from Funk and from Meta, please don't. I think this story is quite. It had its own twists and turns, so it was quite an interesting experience, I would say, to support Vlad. And I hope you find it valuable, and I hope you'll learn from it. So yeah, with that out of the way, welcome Vlad to the live stream.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Really glad to be
Yeah,
here.
thanks so much for agreeing to be here. For me, it's always really special to take this full circle from just talking to somebody, with the discovery session and then kind of interviewing them on my YouTube channel. To me, when I started doing this was kind of the big dream and the goal. So I'm very happy to do this. So let's start with the intros. Maybe you could tell us a bit about yourself, what you do for a living, what your background is, where you're from, and how did you come to the UK?
Yep, sure. So I was born in Orenburg in Russia, and then I moved to Moscow to study there in financial university. I have a background in economics and in applied mathematics in economics. So after it, I started to work in Moscow. It was initially a small consulting company and quite a random first experience, but it introduced me to data science, and I continued my journey as a data scientist as followed. So I worked in a couple of different companies, both classic major IT companies in Russia, such as Yandex and Mail, and also some smaller startups. There was one interesting fitness tech startup I worked in, and I worked both as the individual contributor and as the team lead of analytics. So have quite a diverse experience, and it was very interesting to work in all these companies to look at various examples from the industry. And some time ago, actually, like quite 2 years ago, I got contacted by Meta, and though it was after COVID, so the adventures were lacking in the life, and it was one of the opportunities to experience some adventure. And I got lucky to pass all the interview stages and got an offer and to move to UK. So for 2 years, I've been working at Meta and currently working as a data scientist on the intersection of commerce and ads products. So doing some strategic analysis and yeah, just that's mostly for me. And in the spare time, just like reading books, play some piano, and explore London and surroundings.
Oh, so cool. Yeah, you do have quite a diverse experience. And I think this is what makes your case quite interesting because, yeah, it had, kind of, you had experience with, as you said, like both big companies in Russia and here, and then also startup experience, which I think both helped. So a little bit of an off top, but I know people are interested. Like, what was your experience getting into Funk? It's, it's a dream for a lot of programmers, a lot of data scientists. Was it difficult to get in, to go through the interview stage? What was it like for you?
Actually, second time it wasn't that much difficult. It was my second attempt. Actually, maybe I'm good at second attempts, like with this visa. So just
Spoilers.
yeah, sorry. Just yeah, I interviewed originally before COVID, and I didn't make it because it was for manager position, and it was a bit too much of overkill for me, probably. So it was quite hard for me, but I was on the on-site loop. Second time, I was already quite a bit familiar with the interview process. So it was for individual contributor position, and I think the interview process then changed a little bit, and there were some details, how to prepare, maybe what to expect, and I was already a little bit familiar with the questions, so was coming more prepared. And maybe I put more effort into preparing because I was like, it was a really good opportunity, and I tried my best to just find all information, prepare all that I can. But the interview process itself was very structured, very transparent, so I really liked about it that the communication was very clear, and it was nice to just be aware of what's happening, what to expect next, and the feedback was quite detailed. So, but it also was, I think it was the previous moment when I got so happy before actually like getting the global talent visa now.
Yeah.
That when I got an offer, it was quite a nice case to celebrate.
Yeah, amazing. So you moved to London, as you said, 2 years ago on the skilled worker visa, right? The sponsorship visa. What was the experience like going through this visa process? Was it, any difficult for you? What did it look like?
So fortunately, Meta provided quite a lot of support with relocation, so it was easier than just doing it by myself. And but again, it also included some challenges like passing some English exam for B1 level, but still gave some reminders about the university past to prepare for all these tests and try to solve them. And also, of course, getting all these documents and trying to prepare for relocation is difficult, especially when you have some friends, and it's hard to change life maybe in such a dramatic way. But thankfully, we had this opportunity, and it was easy for me and my wife. So we relocated quite smoothly, and but it was quite interesting. So there is a lot of new things to get accustomed to, and the life in the UK is quite different from what I've been used to in Moscow. So, but it was nice. So we're lucky to have good friends here, and the company is nice. So the process went quite smooth, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the benefit of the skilled worker is that the employer takes care of everything for you. You don't really have to worry about anything. You do have to take that test. I remember it was quite weird to take the test because back then, like a decade ago, I took tests like TOEFL, but then, I had to take another test, which felt quite odd to go and take the, I think I actually took a C level test. I don't remember, but yeah, it was quite odd to just take some random test for just the visa. And yeah, it's one of the things that you have to do. But really, I think it's the only hurdle to this process. So you got the visa, you got the relocation package, which was quite smooth, and you stayed in London for a while, and then finally you thought that you need a challenge, and you decided to switch to the global talent visa, which is famous for being quite difficult to get and quite an intense process of getting it. So what were some of the motivations to getting it? Because I'm sure a lot of people will be watching this, and also again, like I see quite a lot of people are watching this on LinkedIn. So if you're watching this, please say hi in comments. Let us know where you're watching this from, what you do for a living, so that we know who is watching. But also, if you have any questions to me or to Vlad, maybe about the visa, about moving to London, about working at Meta or another big company, you can ask, and we'll be happy to answer. But yeah, so you spent some time working, on a skilled worker visa. What was the motivation for making this big switch? What are some of the benefits that you saw in the global talent visa?
So lately, as you may be aware, there's some period of uncertainty in IT companies and in IT market, and maybe in the global market in general. So originally, I learned about this visa quite randomly from some chats, not dedicated to the global talent visa, and also from one of my former coworkers who was planning to apply as part of one of these uncertainties. And but in general, I think I learned from this visa that it's quite an interesting option, but I wasn't considering it for myself. Later, when again this year there was another announcement of a new wave of layoffs in Meta, things got a little bit uncertain again, and I was thinking that okay, maybe I need to consider providing more safety for me and just more stability, so just to work and not be worried about any possible circumstances. And also, I learned that global talent visa provides some flexibility, so you don't need to obtain the new sponsorship certificate, for example. And so you generally have more options if something happens with your current employment. And as also I have people dependent on me, it would also provide some like safety, stability, which is like you can't have not enough of it. In general, I learned about this visa quite randomly and from some random sources, so the information is quite fragmented. And I was mainly just looking at different forums and chats. When this was in March, I read just a couple of reviews from my coworkers who obtained the global talent visa, and they were mostly getting it for criteria 2 and 3, and so it was quite a specific experience. And I was also thinking that maybe it's not for me. Originally, I wasn't planning to apply in such a short time frame, because it was quite a tight timeline given all these updates and uncertainties, and also some uncertainty around TechNation closure or not closure, which was back in March, still not decided. And the communications were not so transparent. So with all this in mind, I was just thinking that there is such a big stream of information. But generally, I understood that it is a good choice, and it would provide a lot of flexibility and safety, and it would just let me focus on my work. So I considered that at least I need to try and understand whether it would be a good choice for me to try and switch. Would it be a complete waste of time, or there is some chance? So that's how I initially, with the help of my wife, found Nadia, and we booked the first consultation just at least to discuss, is there any point of trying to apply, or like, because I was thinking that I don't have enough public profile. I wasn't, there was some, but not so much. And just because of that, I was thinking that definitely needed more clarity and more structure, because all the reviews were in a way similar, but experience seemed so different and so random that I was thinking how it applies to me and what are the things I don't want to miss in all this process.
Yeah, I think for context for people who aren't familiar with, if we say like TechNation closing down, then I receive questions, can I still apply? So yeah, there was a lot of instability when they announced closing, that they were closed down back in end of January, and then like the next few months was a blur because all of the people trying to apply and me trying to help as many people as possible get in. But then even though they shut down, they are still accepting applications as normal. So if you're watching this in July 2023, you can still apply, and the rules are as I stated on their website. So the route is open, despite you hearing something about it closing down. It's still open. So if you're interested, you should definitely make use of this opportunity while it exists. And yeah, I would say that there was like a period when people weren't sure what's happening, and I received a lot of messages. I still receive messages whether people can apply. I do agree with your very British understatement that the communication was very unclear about what's happening. I think it was handled quite poorly, and kind of damaged the reputation of the visa in the sense that a lot of people, I think, have the perception that it's over or something like this. So I think, it was quite a difficult time. So, but of course, I'm very glad that you reached out for this initial consultation, because as you said, information is there, but it's very fragmented. You mentioned criteria, and we'll talk about them. But just for clarity, a lot of people who apply, they actually choose the second criteria, which is the outside contribution, basically things that you do outside of work, which is what people call, this criteria is called by people, you say mentoring. So its second criteria is mentoring. And the third criteria is your contributions to work, basically, at product-led companies, what you've done, how you've led their growth and things like that. And this is what a lot of engineers choose. And I think in the past, it looked like the easiest route to the visa, and actually it was much easier to get it than it is now. So again, important context that if you listen to people who got the visa maybe a year ago, their experience would be very different than the experience that people have now. So so maybe we could talk about the process later. So we had the discovery call. So what did we determine, and how did we proceed? What did we end up doing later? Like what was our cooperation like?
Yeah, so on this discovery call, we discussed generally my case and what is my experience. And I was just clarifying for myself, like how my projects, potentially what I was doing, how it would map to potential criteria, whether something I do is even enough for global talent visa. Because from my perspective, it was quite for people with a very rich public profile, with a very extensive achievements, like founders, some leads of like recognized companies. And I wasn't sure like whether it's even a chance for me to get this visa. So this initial call really outlined for me that there is a chance that there are some profile, like my projects can be also suitable. Of course, like you can't fit everything in this first call, and it was mostly for just outlining the landscape, what can be potentially done, how this is generally structured, and what are the different options for collaboration. And I remember we discussed like that there is this premium coaching and like different packages like for strategy and for review. And as we were planning to apply in quite a tight timeline, I decided with the wife that potentially like it's definitely worth collaborating on this flexible manner, which is much better than just collaborating with some agencies, because I heard from various reviews that agencies take quite a lot of time to prepare the cases, and they are not so flexible. So I was thinking that it would take like quite a lot, and maybe by the time I'm able to receive it with the agency, it would first cost a lot of money, and second, like it's maybe already be too late. So I thought that it's definitely not a choice for me.
Yeah, it was. Just sorry to interrupt, but I just remember I keep thinking back to that time. It was just so stressful I think to everybody. It was so much instability, right? We weren't sure what was happening, like until when can you apply, and designation was so vague about what was happening. So yeah, I think just to be fair, like I think a lot of people were trying to get the visa application done as quickly as possible. So this was a concern for you, right? And this is where I think working with an individual coach offers more flexibility. Like if the coach has availability, they might be able to help you quicker than an agency. Of course, it depends on the agency, but if you are worried about time, you should of course research various agencies, coaches, and see like whose timeline is consistent and appropriate for you. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree totally. So back in the day, it was quite understanding the timeline is quite tight. I was thinking maybe like weeks, not months, definitely, and preparing it as soon as possible would be the best option. So we decided to go with this flexible option and booked initial strategy call, before which you gave me homework, and I prepared some. It was quite an interesting reflection exercise, just to reflect on the previous experience, remember all the previous projects and companies I worked at. So it was a bit nostalgic in a way, and just to remember what has been done, which of those projects I would do differently today. So it was interesting. Maybe sometimes reach out to some of the people I was chatting to and working with back in the day. So it was quite interesting. And then during the strategy session, basically we discussed which criteria would be suitable and how much of the projects I have for each of the criteria. Then I was still considering second potentially criteria, just having some public speaking and some articles, also mentoring experience. I was thinking that maybe it would be enough for the second criteria, because I wasn't that much calibrated. I heard some of the stories and I was thinking, okay, maybe it suits me. But actually from this strategy call, I understood that it's not enough potentially for the criteria too. But what wasn't so obvious for me is that I can get criteria 1, which is innovation, and it's not so common as I understood. But I was initially even thinking that you can only apply for this criteria if you are like founder of some innovative company and not an employee. But in criteria, it definitely states in technician guide that you can be an employee of an innovative company. And actually, I had some experience of working in innovative companies, which helped me here. Oh yeah, and generally we just mapped all the projects that I had to different criteria and discussed what is the general structure, what are the documents that I need, and what are the best people to get the letter of recommendations from out of those whom I was able to ask. So it really helped me to get a complete picture and also some plan of action. So I think the first problem when you just start this process is that there is an information overload. Definitely, like when you especially do it yourself, there's so much information from all available sources and you just don't know where to start. And this is like blank page, writer's block. But then actually after the strategy session, I got a clear plan, and like it was much more certainty that I'm able to do it. And that really helped. So understanding how to proceed, what's like the order of actions, what's the steps necessary to be taken, that really helped.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think that strategy is a good way just to save time on research and also realize which criteria are easiest for you to make. I remember the session where we talked about the second criteria versus the first one. I would say that in some channels and some chats you would see this idea that it's very, very hard to meet the first criteria unless you are a founder of an innovative startup, or even that it's impossible. So a lot of people go for the second criteria and then they get rejected for it because they have very weak evidence. And I think it's important to weigh the probability, which one is strongest in your particular case. I would say that for the second criteria, you really need to have, by this point, I think, July 2023, I think you need to have quite strong evidence to meet the criteria for talent, especially. So for a lot of people, counterintuitively, it might be easier to meet the first criteria. Of course, you have to show the track record of innovation at different places, that you have been working in innovative companies, innovative fields, or and doing this consistently throughout your career. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how did you prove innovation? Because I think this is $1 million question that people always ask, like, what kind of evidence can I use to prove innovation? Maybe you could just give us an idea, an example of what an employee can use. So somebody who is a data scientist or an engineer working at a company, like what kind of evidence can they use?
Yep, sure. So I think the innovation criteria was particularly tricky for me previously, because on Technation Guide, it's not stated clearly what are the criteria they use to define the innovation. So out of all criteria, maybe innovation is defined most vaguely. It's quite, how to say, it's not transparent how they would decide it. So to prove the innovation, I actually used a mix of different evidences. So for example, for each of the cases I was working at, I was using a mix of my personal explanation what the innovation was, coupled with some of the descriptions and maybe charts, if it's possible, just to describe to technician worker what is the innovation, how it worked, and what was made by you, and how we contributed. Then there was also some public reference, if possible. In my case, I got quite lucky that my company I worked at was actually a member of Skolkovo, which is innovative incubator in Russia. And that was kind of a proof of innovation, because Skolkovo has quite a thorough procedure of selection of companies, and the fact that the company was in Skolkovo and that some of the innovations I was mentioning were mentioned on the company's page gave an external proof that it's kind of something recognized and really an innovation. Also, there have been some articles that highlighted some of the innovative cases that I've been working on, so I was also able to use them. And I used some of the small letters of reference, particularly with the people I worked with, just to highlight that I was indeed working on it and what was my contribution. And it was quite important. I wouldn't know without Nadia's help that the innovation, you need to also prove with the actual work, with some of the commits, if you have this opportunity, or some maybe screenshots of tasks or whatever you can provide, given the fact that you need definitely to get an approval for it. And in my case, I was lucky. I contacted the CEO of my company, and he gave me an approval to get some screenshots of the tasks and provide some screenshots of commits for this case. And in that, I was quite lucky. So, and generally, this mix of evidences, I think, got me in this place like quite in a good shape to provide the details and to prove the innovation. I'm not sure like what's the weight of each of these components, but they definitely, generally, they all tell this story, and they also explain in a way that technician worker can understand it and get the sense of innovation, how it's done, and what's inside it.
Yeah, I think it was real. Like you did it quite nicely. And just to jump ahead, we had the strategy session, and then we had the review package where I reviewed the documents that you prepared, the drafts. And I think you prepared really strong mixture of evidences, as you said. It's very important to have a mixture of different kind of things. So you should have something that you write yourself, like a self-written explanation, but your document shouldn't be just you talking about yourself. Then it's good to have a letter, but again, you cannot just have letters. And it's good to have some screenshots, but again, you can't just submit screenshots. So I think a mixture of things really worked very well in your case. And the cases where I've worked on that have been successful with innovation, I think they have all been actually from employees. So I have quite a good experience with helping people prove innovation as employees, and all of the cases have been like this. So it's a mixture of external proof, a letter, something else, something that shows that you worked on this, and maybe you explaining the innovation. But I think it's very important to remember that if you're proving innovation, your document should explain what the innovation was, why it was an innovation, and what specifically you've done. You cannot just hope that they understand that this was an innovation. Most likely it won't be understood. And again, some people make this mistake of focusing on impact. So for instance, they're talking about building a company that made, I don't know, $1 million, and they're saying, okay, this is an innovation. It's not an innovation if you made money, right? I think the guide is confusing in this respect. As you said, the guide is very vague when it comes to innovation. So people see that line about their salary or earnings at the company, and they think that it's enough to maintain, to fulfill innovation. But it's not. So it's confusing, but you have to explain basically what was new and what was the new way you did something, or maybe a new product for the market or for the world, or maybe you invented a new way to do something. You have to explain it. And I think having letters really helps to explain and to verify that this was an innovation, especially if you don't have external proof. I think in your case, what made it much stronger is that you had some publications, you had an innovative accelerator that you were part of, and things like that. Also, I would advise people to look at, if you received any grants. Some grants are, given for innovation. You can use that, and basically you tie in anything that you can find. But having external proof, I think, is super important, especially now. I think in the past it was a bit easier to meet innovation, but it was easier to meet all of the criteria. So you have to really work hard to prove this one. But it's still possible, right? It's still possible. It might be difficult, but it's still possible, because the second criteria, if you don't have the stuff, if you don't have the evidence, you haven't done the the mentoring, the public speaking, you can't just create it or by research. So I think innovation at least gives hope to a lot of people who don't have much of a public profile, as you said. So in terms of public profile, maybe you could give us an idea of what kind of public profile did you have, more or less. Like, you said that you didn't have much of it, but what kind of evidences did you have for external recognition? Maybe you can give us some ideas of that.
Yep. So I had a little bit of everything, to be honest, but not a lot in every bucket. So I had some public speaking, which was quite a while ago, and one recent experience. I had some of the media mentions, so some articles, for example, which I was part of, or like interview which I was part of. Also had some of the mentoring program participations, and it was something. And I was thinking that eventually it would be enough for the second criteria, but it wasn't enough. What's good is that it's suitable for the mandatory criteria, and technician guide says this. So you can use such evidences for the mandatory criteria, probably if you have some public profile, but not a lot to put into the separate criteria. And it was really good that there was something to use. And also, it's interesting how to provide these details. I think you really helped us to think about like what evidence needs to be for the mandatory criteria related to public profile, and how to prove that that was indeed something that demonstrates leadership, and that there was some like really good program, so that the articles have got some engagement that is enough for the technician guides. So eventually these documents have been also quite comprehensive, and we made as much of them as possible. I think will help.
Yeah, your documents were just really good. So you maybe you could talk to us a little bit, just a few words about the review package and what it was like. So just for people who are tuning in, maybe. So the way you can cooperate with me is by getting kind of like light touch help, so that we get the strategy together. Then you prepare the draft of the document on your own, and then you come back to me and I review them before you apply, so that you get guidance on what to improve, what to change, and how to avoid mistakes. So this way you kind of get, I think, the best of both worlds. But maybe you could talk to us about your experience. What was it like to get review? What was the experience like? Because sometimes people, I think, told me that there was a lot of feedback, a lot of things to change. But yeah, what it was like for you?
Yes, I think the review package was very useful. And initially, I think when I prepared the first batch of the documents to send for the feedback, I was quite optimistic about them, and then I got a lot of feedback. A lot of it just needs to be redone, and I got quite upset. But the comments made sense. So initially, when you start writing it, it's quite like you're very optimistic, like coming to do all this stuff quite fast and write everything from the first attempt. But then eventually there is quite a lot of like layers of complexity, and you really need to think of how to approach this optimally. And I think from the beginning, you don't have a lot of sense, like I didn't have a lot of sense of how basically optimally structure all these documents and what the different types of evidences are about, like how do you optimally structure them. And the comments, I think the nature of the comments that they were iterative. So I sent a bunch of comments and then get some feedback from you and then can apply these comments to the next documents was very useful. And it helped really to fine tune the process. Like I'm a data scientist, so can give like some machine learning analogy. So it really like speeds up the iteration process and the learning process of like propagating the errors back to improve your own like process of preparing the document. So the next documents really came out better, and I was grabbing a feel with the process, what needs to be in every document and what should be the style and maybe the types of references to include. And generally, it really helped. And I think, especially what I highlight, Technation has quite a lot of requirements in terms of these documents, which are easy to miss if you're doing them just by yourself. So you can miss some LinkedIn profiles of your reference, like that they need to be in place. Or, for example, not think about including some evidences of your personal contribution and work on this particular project. So there are a lot of small things, and potentially you can just compile a long list of things and go like checklist style that you have everything. But potentially, from my perspective, it was like quite hard to get it all in mind. But then actually when you go with it and you go through the iteration cycles, preparing, we started first with this like third criteria, and then switch to the first one. So working on these documents really provide the opportunity to understand better how to structure them, what language to use. I think it's also quite important that for Eastern Europeans, I guess there is this mentality that we're not used to write like in a very positive way. Even the achievement was cool, you still write it quite like politely and not assigning the contribution to yourself for those types of documents. And for me, it was even like when I read the letters of reference, I realized that, oh, well, when people are speaking about me in such tone, I'm quite uncomfortable. But I guess that it's just one interesting barrier, which also was really helpful from your feedback. That it's okay, and it's like when with this type of visa, you really need like strong evidences, and there is no place to be like super shy about the achievements if they worth it. So
I agree. I think
yeah.
Yeah, again, like as somebody from Belarus, I totally understand the desire kind of to minimize your achievement and also to be shy. I think in Eastern European societies, the culture is to diminish yourself and not promote your own achievements. I think it's common for everybody, but I found that it's even stronger in women. You know, you're taught to be very modest and not talk about yourself, which I think is really detrimental to your success in life. So yeah, I think as a coach, weirdly enough, it's much easier for me to bring out those things in others. And this is what I like about this process, to just help people tell their story in the most, in the strongest way possible, basically. But yeah, as you said, it's hard to talk about yourself. This is why a lot of people find value in working with somebody, because then somebody else is kind of helping you do that. But yeah, the iterations, I think I found them really useful as well. I just saw how your documents became better and better with each iteration. And I've tried this mode of working with a few people, and it always works this way that the first document maybe needs a lot of work, but then the next is better and the next is better, and then they're getting like really good, and then they're over. We have to apply. But yeah, it was quite an interesting process. I also learned a lot as a coach. Like with each client, I learned a lot and see how people react to feedback. And also, yeah, I think it's hard to receive feedback, especially if you put in a lot of time, right, in the document, and then somebody tells you, oh, like this needs to be written. But also, it's quite common. Everybody goes through that. I would say that pretty much almost everybody has the same issues with writing about themselves, and there are cultures where it's more common to praise themselves, but like in terms of reviewing documents, I would say that a lot of people struggle with the same thing. So it's common to get feedback. I would say that I would be a bit skeptical if I wrote something and somebody said, oh, it's like perfect, and there is nothing to change. It happens, but I think it's quite rare. So we did those iterations. We prepared the documents. I think we covered the innovation. We talked about mandatory a little bit. Maybe you can give us just a brief idea of the third criteria, the significant contribution. What kind of evidence can somebody use who is with a similar profile to you?
Yeah, so for third criteria, I guess from the reviews, I learned that third criteria is usually easiest to meet out of 4. So for the one who leads the projects and contributes to strategic initiatives in the IT companies, it can be quite like a straightforward choice to pick this criteria and just provide the evidence. So from my perspective, I was a part of quite a lot of strategic teams back in a couple of companies I worked at. So the types of evidence I include there, it was a bit different from innovation in the way that you explain it from different sides. So we need to highlight some of the contribution of these projects to some strategic direction, ideally to revenue, if you can align with the company that you can somehow provide these numbers and tie your contribution to the revenue. It's not usually the case, but sometimes it's possible. I also used some of the projects where I was, for example, as a data scientist, just driving some strategic road mapping, and that my analysis helped to prioritize a lot of work, which was sometimes it's possible for data scientists, I think, to prove and to provide such types of projects because it's basically one of the main things we do. And also there was some project with regards to some formation of the joint venture, was what I was supporting from the analytics side and providing some financial modeling. So it was quite a lot of analytical contribution, and the outcome of like forming a new enterprise was quite big from the revenue perspective and from the perspective of like impact on the market as a whole. So when it's possible, was trying to link it to some broader markets, when not, at least to the company, because if the company is big and you can influence the strategy and the roadmap of the whole products, it's also quite big, and it's a nice contribution from the analytical side. And also like with the innovation documents, I was providing some letters of reference, also only for 1 page, from some of the experts I worked with and which know my work, just to highlight how I was contributing and describing a little bit more about why this project was cool and important and impactful.
Yeah. So as you said, the documents I think for the first and the third one are quite similar in structure. So they're usually a mixture again of some self-written information, some publications or external stuff, or some dashboards or whatever you can share, and then letters from people who know about the stuff. And just to clarify, these are additional letters to the ones that are required, the 3 big ones. It's quite common, I think, to have a lot more than 3 letters in your application. It's just that the other ones will be shorter, so will be typically 1 page, 2 pages. And I think it's very important especially if you're an employee, you don't have much of a public profile, or maybe you don't have very big, achievements like raising a big round or being mentioned in media. I think it's very important to have many letters that prove the points that you need to prove, basically, right? And then the letters are strategically positioned to talk about what is necessary, right? So if the letter is going for the third criteria, then it's talking about impact. And then if the letter is going to the first criteria, it's focused on innovation and what is the new thing about it. And it's super important. So I would say that it's not easy to meet innovation, but I think it's possible in a lot of cases. So I would encourage people to look into this criteria and see whether they can meet it. I wouldn't say that it's, a lot of people still get rejected for this criteria, but then a lot of people get endorsed. And I do think that this is a criteria where a lot depends on the implementation and how well you present the evidence. So yeah, if you hear people getting rejected for it, don't think that it's not for you. It's just might be that their documents weren't that well prepared or something like this, or maybe they didn't have any innovations. But I think a lot of it, as I said, like it's so subjective. Like what is innovation? It's up to you basically to create a convincing story of this being an innovation, right? So to sum up, we worked together. How long did it take to prepare the whole application? It was very quick.
Yeah, it was quite quick because of all this news and timelines. I think we started collaborating in the middle of March, and I submitted the application on the 12th of April. it was the cosmonautics day, and I believe that there is some like lucky magic of numbers maybe that would help me if I submit.
Yeah, you took it to the moon basically. Yeah, so yeah, you applied, and like as I said, like your documents were really really good. I mean, the quality of the writing, the evidence, like it was very strong. The experts, like the everything was really great. So I was very happy with the result, and I think you were as well. So how long did you wait for the decision, and what did it say?
I was waiting quite a long time. I think
Mm-hmm.
it was because of TechNation's news that they would probably cease operations, probably not, so which was in the end of March. So a lot of people applied, and I think they had quite a long backlog. So I was waiting for the decision for almost 2 months, and I got the response basically on the end of May, and the response told that I got rejection, which was quite sad news for me, and I wasn't expecting it at all. Like I said, the letters were very well prepared, and all the evidences, all the documents were like really good. I think we really made everything that could be possible out of my profile, and like presented it in a suitable way. So I wasn't expecting it. I was thinking that like the chances are quite high, and maybe there is some like already attachment happening to your case when you work on it for quite a long time, and then it's quite disappointing to get rejection. And I had only third criteria approved initially, and the mandatory criteria and the innovation criteria got rejected. So, but actually, what was interesting that the reasons of rejection weren't something that wasn't in the documents. So, from the reasons, it seemed like there is some opportunity to argue with those, and because the supporting like materials contains the information that is sufficient maybe to prove that no, it's not the case, that the reason is not true, and you can just the documents indeed meet TechNation criteria, and so they need to potentially reconsider them. So we decided to try to appeal, as TechNation says that if you think that your case wasn't like processed in a fair way, or maybe that they made an error, that you think they made an error. And in my case, I was thinking that, okay, potentially that these evidences are indeed enough, and we can try to at least appeal and to see what they would respond, whether some of the criteria would be met or maybe all of them. But I wasn't 100% thinking that I would get a positive decision after appeal. But still, it was worth trying from my perspective.
Yeah. So maybe you could, again, like just to clarify for people who aren't familiar, if you get rejected, you will get a document that explains why you were rejected. So it will be, it's usually quite detailed. Sometimes it's very short and it's just like copy paste from TechNation guide, which I think is really sad when it happens, but sometimes people don't get good explanations, right? But usually you will get a really detailed explanation, but the level, of how much detail you will get, it will vary, I think. I'm not sure like what it depends on, but I've seen rejections that are like very short and then ones that are really, really long. So I think in your case, you got a good kind of amount of detail, like what specifically they didn't like about it, what didn't convince them, and you will get a breakdown of which criteria you got awarded and which ones you didn't get. So then you can understand like what are the chances of getting endorsed after an appeal and how you can approach this. Again, we obviously won't go into the details of like what exactly it said, but maybe you can give us just one example that you're comfortable sharing, like what they weren't convinced about, and then maybe we could talk about how you managed to prove that they were actually wrong in your appeal. And maybe you could talk to us about like what does it look like to file an appeal, because again, this sounds very mysterious and people aren't really familiar with the process.
Yeah, so actually, just maybe a small disclaimer, I think the rules are constantly changing and the perception of TechNation is also constantly changing. So I think what worked for me, first of all, I'm not sure what worked for me out of those things that I appealed to, because in positive case, when they make a positive decision, TechNation doesn't provide a lot of details here, any details actually, what worked and what not. So I can only think that some of the things I tried worked. And also I think the perception and the reasons also are changing. Sometimes something worked previously and now it doesn't work. But to get into the exact details, I think the first one that I was thinking particularly, the reason to argue with was that the talks and the articles I was featuring were quite a while ago, but actually the articles were like 4 years ago, which is in line with the technician guidance, and I provided that information that it's in line and it's okay. Also, another reason was that the talk I was given was like minor compared to the event, but the talk I was given was quite niche. And also, if you read the technician guides, then you can see that there is like one requirement that the talk would be main stage, but it's for optional criteria too, for the public profile, but not for the mandatory criteria. So I thought that maybe like it's not required for the mandatory, and indeed the talk had got a good engagement. So in the documents we were providing some of the references that people have been reaching out, and that the feedback from organizers was good. So I decided to just provide that, so it's got a meaningful engagement and it was a good event. So those were the reasons. Some of them, eventually what I did with the appeal was just thinking about all the reasons that they have listed and in this response letter. And there were quite some number of reasons. So breaking it down into the manageable chunks, so maybe some separate reasons, and then trying to link it to the documents we had. And as I was saying previously, with the help of Nadia, we get quite a comprehensive documents with a lot of details. So actually it was very good. That was some material to actually include and to like argue with, because you are not allowed to include any additional references, even if something can argue and it's not included, then in this case you won't be able to include it just post factum. You will need to supply like file a new case and like make a new application. But in my case it was in there, so I was able to refer it, and just for every of the reasons of rejection I just written what's been the reason and why I think it's not the case, why it should indeed my case meets the application the rules of technician, and just providing some small explanation. So we don't have a lot of space for providing these reasons, and you just have some small box. So whichever fits in this box, and I think there are four boxes basically, you can just describe what was the initial rejection reason, maybe include a couple of them in one box if it's possible, and if they are quite short and related, and then explain in your words why you think that it's not the case and your application meets the criteria of technician. So I was just briefly explaining that no, that's not the case for some of these things, and that I have it in my documents, and as you can see, it's meeting the criteria. So the general process was like that, and I just compiled these 4 brief paragraphs which contain these references and really brief explanation, and basically submitted it. It took me maybe like half a day to compile it all, and it was quite like, I don't know, it went quite fast. I wasn't really thinking that it would work, but just was thinking, why not? It's I think in the cases when the reasons are strong, maybe it doesn't worth reappealing, but in the cases when you can really think of the way that you have the true evidence that proves that you're meeting this criteria and for some reason you're getting the rejection, it's totally worth to try and appeal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that sometimes I see cases where somebody is rejected on all of the criteria, and I see that their application was really poorly prepared. There were a lot of mistakes in it, not enough documents, or just some really weak documents. And then I usually say that you can appeal, but the chances of it going through are very, very low, and maybe it's worth submitting a new application, or maybe working on your profile and then applying later. But I think in your case, it did seem that it did feel quite unfair in a way, and also the documents were really good. But also I think we all felt that, if you appeal and they aren't convinced, then at least we know that we've done everything possible, and like everything that you had, like all of the experience that you had was prepared in the strongest possible way. And it's just that it's not enough for them. And I think it can happen sometimes as well. So I've seen cases like this where everything is perfect and the documents are very well done, everything is there, but then technician is still unconvinced even after an appeal, because it's just they think that it's not enough. And I think it's very common to be rejected actually on the mandatory criteria. since it's the one that is very much dependent on the external recognition. So for instance, if you don't have awards, if you don't have like public speaking engagements or thought leadership like articles or like competitions or like things like that, it might be difficult to prove this criteria, especially if you're applying for talent. So I would encourage people to really make sure that they pull in anything external that they can have and work on their profile in general. So yeah, you apply it, and as you said, like you didn't have like very high hopes for the result. But then when did you hear back? How long did it take you to hear back, and what was the answer? But I guess we already know the answer.
Yeah, so it took around 3 weeks to hear back, and I already was like considering that the only purpose of this response would likely be just getting more signal about the innovation, whether they would count the innovation criteria or not, and what are the bits that I need to complete or revoke for the next assignments. I already started some work on my public profile, started to think and plan like what maybe external engagements can I have, like what conferences to speak on, what mentoring program to engage in. And then accidentally one day I just received a letter. It was like mid-June, and quickly scanning the letter with the eyes, I just saw something about rejection. I was thinking, oh great, this is like of course they rejected my appeal. But then actually quickly scanning through this text, I read that, oh no, they meet the criteria and I get an endorsement, which was crazy. I was like, I wasn't believing it. And I read the letter a couple of times. I invited my wife to read the letter. We read together like 5 more times. And then eventually we agreed that indeed, like the letter doesn't look very like party mood, so it's very bureaucratic, and it's quite hard to grasp from the first reads like what it actually means. So you need to read it a couple of times to understand. Am I meeting it? No. What happened? And then after this, when you actually understand, it's quite a happy thing. I think
Yeah.
it
It's
was
amazing.
very good.
It's amazing to hear from you guys when you messaged me that you got the appeal, that it worked. It was great news for me. I was really happy because again, like when I work with people, I get very kind of personally attached to each case, and I really vouch for every case. But yeah, sometimes like rejections unfortunately happen. But it was really good to hear that they kind of came to their senses and they saw the light, and the rejection was overturned, because I did find it was quite unfair, and some of the things that Momo mentioned in the rejection were just really odd. So yeah, I think if you get rejected, it's worth. I think at first it really hurts because you've put in so much time and effort, and if you're working with somebody then again money to this, and then they reject you, and it's like it just feels really horrible. But I think it's worth taking some time off it, away from it, just to process it, and then talk to somebody else to show maybe your rejection to somebody else, and just ask them what do they think about it and how to appeal. But also just be aware that you know your case best. If you're working with a coach, they can help you draft an appeal. If you're working alone, you can draft an appeal on your own. It's as I said, it's about just explaining what they missed, and it's about the structure that I suggest to people is just having a Google document and having a table, and you have on the left, you can have what they say, like maybe they say like, I don't know, your salary is not very good, right? And then on the right, you can say, like, you can write how you will explain that your salary is actually exceptionally high for the market. And then on the left, if you say you don't have any conferences, then you can say, no, actually, I have a conference that was significant because of A, B, C. So this is a very simple structure you can use to draft your appeal. And then the biggest challenge is how do you fit everything in, because it's a limited space. But I think the purpose is to be succinct and very brief there, but you can still overturn it, right? You will get a fresh new assessor reading this, so it's possible that they will have a very different perception of what you wrote, and it's possible that you can overturn it. So yeah, and the reading of the letter, like my clients very often will send me screenshots of the decision letter from technician and just ask me like, what does it mean? Did I get it? Somebody messaged me recently, it was like, oh, is it a scam letter? Because it was very quick. So it was just like 7 days between them applying and getting the letter. And they were like, it must be like some sort of fake scam letter because it can't be that quick. And also, yeah, it doesn't look like much. It's just a very short letter that is very confusing. So yeah, it's a common issue. Like you don't understand what it says, and you have to read it and ask somebody else like to prove. And yeah, it's just something that happens. But this was a question that I got asked some time ago. Like, what do people feel after they get endorsed? I think everybody feels very relieved and excited and just. I don't know. How do you feel now after you've been endorsed for this visa, and after all this is kind of behind you? What are your feelings now?
So definitely it was great news. I think it was like winning some competition or some contest back in the high school, maybe in the university. It was very like a good occasion to celebrate, and it was very nice. I think it was also quite comforting in a way that this work paid off. So all the hard work we did together, like this weeks of preparing documents, just working on them, and that it indeed was useful, and it made the case good, and was with its help was able to just meet the criteria. And especially what's I think makes it happy is some external validation, which is also useful. So just to understand that by the rules of UK companies, you are talent. So it's quite pleasant to hear, because sometimes it's also quite, we don't get so much external recognition in the normal life. Maybe like there are some, I don't know, likes and comments and the work posts or in LinkedIn, but generally like to get some, I don't know, maybe not so fancy looking like this email or like some line on the BRP, but still it's good to have some sort of external recognition which validates the proof and that your work was quite good. So yeah, that's very nice and very relieving. And I think it's quite pleasant to get this visa just because it allows just more flexibility and more safety. And I think it got me a little bit like unexpected. I'm expecting all these changes, and I was like in the middle of new mentoring programs, just already preparing for maybe new talks. And it's kind of given a relief in a way that you can still do it. Like it's worth continuing with the public profile, but you can do it just not looking like for the particular event to just be meeting the technician criteria. Just do something that you like, maybe what you enjoy. So that's in a way relieving. And in generally, I think it's quite a happy news. So that was great experience.
Congrats again. So if you look back on the whole experience of preparing for the visa, preparing all of the documents, maybe you could tell us what was the most challenging thing about the whole process, and relatedly, what kind of tips would you like to share with somebody who is preparing to apply? Anything that you learned during the process that wasn't quite intuitive to you when you started, and just any kind of closing thoughts that you might have for our audience.
So I think the hardest parts were, first of all, just preparing the documents. Even with the support, like just given the tight timeline, it was quite hard to prepare everything. It's quite a lot of work. And I think especially when you have a profile that is not 100% obvious talent and suiting all the criteria, you really need to think and work on it. And I even had a week off to prepare the documents and like took the weekends to prepare them. So it's quite a long time. So initially I was thinking it's going to be a walk in the park, just to write some documents, compile the evidences and just do it. But like to make it really good quality documents and include everything, it's quite a lot of mental effort. It's also communicating with all the referents, because if you have referents, usually they are quite busy people and they're leaders in the industry. So you need to provide them with the summary, like what are the criteria that needs to be met, like what they need to mention in the letter, because like you won't expect the CEO of the company just to go and read the technician guide for you to write the most correct letter of reference. And so all these small details and all this communication, all this preparation was quite overwhelming. But I think it was quite short period of time, maybe as I look back, but in the moment, it's quite hard. I think the second hardest moment was after you submit all these documents, just to wait for the decision. Especially in my case, it was like almost 2 months. And the process is not transparent at all. You just submit something in the dark. You have only this last edited dates to look at, that something has been done with the application. and you can't see what has been done. There are no status updates on the technician side. You can just monitor this metric, look at the others' reviews when they apply, like update some statistics on their side. So, and you just sit and wait, and it's quite hard. And then eventually, like, you get some response, and yeah, this period ends. But in my case, it was a bit upsetting. But then, after some time, it paid off. And that's speaking of the hard moments, I think. Speaking of the advices, I would maybe suggest, like, every person's case is different, and I think everyone needs to consider own circumstances and to think about some sort of trade-off of money and time when considering the global talent visa application. So if you decide to appear like to compile the like case and to apply, one should just think about what's the best way, like what's the critical metric here, like what's the resource that is more crucial. If it's there is a lot of time and like money is critical, then there is definitely an opportunity to just research and go through all these forums, through the technician guides, and do it yourself. But it would be quite an effort, I would say. So from my perspective, it's an option, you can take it, but be prepared that you'll need to have quite a hard work. Then would be also a flexible option, the flexible path that I chose. And I would definitely recommend it as quite a good trade-off between time and money. So not working on some maybe premium coaching, so not expecting like real-time feedback and like that everything would be done for you. And spoiler, like in any case, that there is low chances that everything would be done for you, just because if you're not doing jobs,
it's marketing. It's marketing that you kind of pay and then you don't do anything. It sounds good, and I think it would be great if it was possible. But I think working with an agency or a coach, you will get a lot of support, but still you will need to be involved, right? If you want to make a good case, but as I said, like if you aren't a very public person, with millions of articles about you, then you will still need to be involved, and you will still have to spend your time on this. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, so this flexible path I think is the best, because you have the best of both worlds. You kind of can have some money back for like preparing the case, and then you also have a lot of support, and it's quite flexible. So in my case, it was quite a tight timeline, and you can work in whatever timeline you're comfortable with. So if you're able to prepare everything in one day, okay, then it's also possible probably, but still. And yeah, definitely there is options like which are more expensive and provide more support, but in them you would also need to do some work if you're not super public person. Like because you're usually the best person who knows your work and can provide more details about it. So that would be my just thoughts about it. But in general, just I would recommend this visa. It's like a great option, and for a lot of IT people. So if you think you can apply for it and you have enough profile, like if you're a data scientist, then definitely go for it and try. That's a great option.
I also not just for IT professionals, but also for a lot of other professionals, right? So for artists, architects, and a lot of other people can apply. So this option exists for a lot more people than I think people realize. I hear from people who are musicians or artists or dancers, and they have no idea that they can actually move to the UK with this visa, because there is still this perception that the UK is such a closed country and it's very hard to get in. But ironically, like after Brexit, it became actually much easier to get a visa, because there are a lot more opportunities now than there used to be at some point. So it is like, I think that there are options to move to the UK if you're interested, if this is a country where you want to live. And to your point about like levels of coaching, I would say that for premium level coaching, a lot of people find this valuable. It's more expensive, but you get more support that is like more on point, more like almost like hand holding in a way, because you get, it's like with a coach, if you're going to, the gym, right? Somebody who's kind of like checking up on you and kind of asking you, where is this document? Like, how is it going? Motivating you, and like asking you questions and kind of pushing it forward. So I think it's a great option for people who struggle with organizing themselves, managing a big project, and who really need somebody kind of helping them keep organized, keep on track. Because with my premium coaching clients, we kind of had this like timeline and regular syncs in the calendar, and like they knew that by this time they need to prepare something for me. So it's a different kind of cooperation, which I think is really is helpful for some clients. And I think you just need to be realistic and know what you're like, what you're how much time you have, and in general, like if you see that you struggle organizing yourself, then this might be a good option for you to have somebody backing you and kind of pushing you forward. But also, I do think that for, as you said, like for a lot of people, they don't need this option. And I personally very much prefer just the option that we had with you, where I've helped with the strategy and then I supported with the review and helping you organize the documents. I think it was the most efficient one, I think the quickest one probably, and also like just the one that I enjoy most, because I think this is where like my skills shine, and this is where I feel like it's the probably the kind of the best option for a lot of people who are able to present their case on their own. And I think that most people are very capable of kind of presenting their case, because your experience best and you're the best person to talk about yourself. But yeah, I think that covers it. We had a comment, so interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the comment. Yeah, I think this was a great chat. We uncovered a lot of stuff. We covered a lot of different questions. We talked about the appeals, which I think we don't talk that much online, and there is very little information about it online, like what happens if you get rejected. But a lot of people get rejected, so I think we should talk about it much more. And yeah, if you watch this as a recording, let us know in the comments what you learned. Was there anything? I'm very curious to hear. Was there anything new here that you've never known before? I would say that a lot of things from this interview would have been very valuable for me when I was applying, a year ago or a little over a year ago. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. I do wish to thank you, Vlad, again for your time, for showing up today and telling your story. And yeah, it was a pleasure working with you. And again, congrats on the visa. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in, and I wish you a great week ahead. Bye.